Welcome to the Rare Sense Podcast. This is Chris Irwin. Today I'm speaking with Neil Markey. Neil is the CEO of Beckley Retreats, a company that uses psilocybin to help heal people. Their program includes a 4-week virtual preparation phase, a 5-night on-location retreat in Jamaica or the Netherlands, and a 6-week integration phase. I actually participated in their inaugural offering in late 2021. If you want to hear about my personal experience there, you can listen to episode 9 of the Rare Sense Podcast with John Macaskill and Will Schneider. I thought the program was exceptionally well designed and executed, and I spoke more about my reflections in this interview. Neil was a captain in the U.S. Army Special Operations 2nd Ranger Battalion, who deployed once to Iraq and twice to Afghanistan. After his time in the military, he suffered from depression and PTSD while studying at Columbia University. This led him to explore mindfulness and meditation practices that marked the start of a profound healing journey involving the use of psychedelics. After graduate school, Neil worked as a consultant at McKinsey Co, co-leading the internal mindfulness program, and was the chief growth officer for a $450 million private equity portfolio company. He credits meditation and psilocybin with saving his life, and ultimately found his true calling when he joined forces with Amanda Fielding of the Beckley Foundation, which is dedicated to furthering psychedelic research and advocating for policy reform. Together, they founded Beckley Retreats to combine the latest science in plant medicine with ancient wisdom and traditions to create a unique healing experience for attendees. It was great catching up with Neil, and I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Lastly, remember that Rare Sense content is not medical advice, nor does it represent the official position or opinions of any other organization or person. If you require diagnosis or treatment for a mental or physical issue or illness, please seek it from a licensed professional. Now, without further ado, here's Neil Markey. All right, Neil, good to see you, brother.
Good to see you too, man. Thanks for having me.
Are you in, it looks like you're in Jamaica. Is that where you are?
I'm in Costa Rica. But I was just in Jamaica, and we'll be back in Jamaica here in a couple weeks.
What are you doing in Costa Rica? Are you just on vacation?
Well, I don't really like winters, and I'm hopeful we'll be able to do this work here. So I'm kind of visited some locations, and we're talking with the government and trying to figure that out a bit.
But is there a winter in Jamaica?
Well, I'm here. There's better surfing here than in Jamaica. There's almost no surfing in Jamaica. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, it's probably like St. Thomas then. St. Thomas, when I lived there, has no surf to speak of, really, most of the time.
It's a shame. I wish there was some good surf in Jamaica.
But it's got other upsides, though.
Yeah, for sure.
Beautiful in other ways.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's just start off, as I always do, just give everybody a quick synopsis of your background and what you do now, because it's obviously going to be really relevant here.
Yeah, I guess I started my career as a mathlete, as a mathematician. I was going to school for math, thinking I was going to go do cryptology or something at the intelligence agencies, and then September 11th happened. Next thing you know, I'm in the service. I spent most of my 20s in the Army. I went to Iraq once, Afghanistan twice. Got out, went to grad school.
As a Ranger, right? I mean, you were a Ranger.
I was regular Army for 3 years and then 3.5 in 2nd Ranger Battalion.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. But I always say, I wasn't a badass, but I got to work with a lot of badasses.
Yeah. That's very demurring of you.
And then I got out in 2012. So it's crazy that, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And then went to graduate school. And there is where I got into meditation and where I got into, using psychedelics mindfully.
And where'd you go to grad school?
Columbia University.
Okay.
In New York. And then, I really struggled.
But just stop on that point. When you said that's where you got into that, why? What happened in grad
I was
school?
struggling coming. I didn't know how long of a tale you wanted me to tell here. So
No. I mean, I think it's sometimes people are just like, yeah, I did this, and I did this, but like that's really relevant to what you do now. So let's pause on that.
Yes, point. Super relevant. I mean, the bottom fell out for me. I in some ways was doing well professionally. I was at a good school, but I was miserable. I mean, I was really struggling. I was going through a divorce. I was using alcohol in excess. And I was looking for things to make me feel better and had tried a lot of different traditional approaches. I cycled through different SSRIs, anti-anxiety medications, sleeping pills. And then, I got into meditation. I got introduced to this guy who ended up taking me under his wing and teaching me meditation.
Just like a classmate, or was somebody outside the university?
It was a guy that was getting his PhD at Columbia. His name was Home Nguyen, and he started the Mind Institute and was like a 30-year meditator. And I stumbled into this mindfulness for business leaders course, not really knowing what it was. And it struck me, and I think he was one of the first people that actually could see how much I was struggling, even though I was putting on a front and showing up and doing okay. But he was quite in tune, and he was just really generous with his time and kind of took me under his wing and took me on my first long form program or weekend program.
And so was that like a weekend where you were meditating the entire time, or like extended periods of time, hours at a time?
Extended periods of time, not the entire time. It was also just like be in nature, be with the right type of people that are talking about things other than money. And and then from there, I went on a lot of different longer form programs over those few years that I was in graduate school.
What was the proximate cause of your struggles? Was it, I guess what I'm trying to get to there is, were you thinking about something from your past? Was it like, what were you know what I'm saying? Was there a physical thing going on that was making you feel really miserable? Like, what was it?
Yeah, well, I think it was, there's the big T traumas and the little T traumas. I had a big T trauma where I had a really pretty significant head injury from a jump.
Okay.
And had months after that where, I couldn't remember my locker combination. I couldn't sleep.
Oh,
I had
wow.
a wild temper, and they were just starting to kind of key in on TBIs, but they didn't do anything for me. I went right back to work. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I had that,
rub some dirt on it, get back in there.
Yeah. I mean, it. And, but then, I had some close calls. My deployments, I was quite fortunate relative to a lot of guys, you know what I mean? But I was in these environments that were, in the Ranger Regiment, God bless those guys. When I did my first Ranger deployment, a lot of those guys were on their 10th or their 11th, and so the entire unit had PTSD. And you're around that, and you're just, you're soaking it up.
Yeah.
And so,
and I think that's a real thing, by the way. I think the energy that you absorb from other people, right? Like, can definitely affect you.
Definitely. And just that mindset. You're training to do really, hard things. You don't get any points for being a warm, empathetic, kind, connected man. Right. It's who's the hardest guy in the room every day, and over years that adds up. And, my central nervous system was just at its max. They talk about that, you kind of get into the fight or flight. And then once you're in fight or flight for an extended period of time, you just kind of like, you break, you almost get into this dull mode. I was in that dull mode and, using alcohol too much and was starting to isolate and was starting to have some really dark thoughts. I've left this brotherhood and at least some sense of purpose. And then all of a sudden I'm in Manhattan, New York, around people that I didn't have a whole lot in common with at the time. And all we're talking about is money. No one gave a damn that there was even wars going on. Like, nobody even cared. And it was like this, just really like, it was just and I was going through a divorce, I was struggling, but that Rumi, poem, where he's like, when you're on your knees is like a good time to pray. I felt like I got kind of put on my knees and I was like looking for something to feel better. Yeah. And then, meditation, and then meditation to some of these plants.
And when did that, so obviously we want to get to that because that's your main, this is what you do now.
It's kind of what I do now.
That's what you do.
That's what I do.
So when did the psychedelics come into the picture? How did that happen?
It was like a year into grad school. And it was through that same kind of mindfulness network. And there was a lot of interest at the time, even prior to that time, around could these experiences help veterans? And so I was able to kind of do a off the books underground session with some trained facilitators. And that was pretty significant. And then from there, I started seeking it out and having more of those experiences.
And what happened with your first experience there that made you think, okay, this can be of benefit to me and maybe others too?
Yeah. Well, there was almost like this instant kind of central nervous system release. I always say that it was my central nervous system was like a bunch of rubber bands that were kind of like stretched and twisted, and then some of them were breaking. It was bad, and that it just like allowed for some release. I felt like I wasn't, for some period of time, afterwards, wasn't walking around with my fists clenched all the time on alert. I felt that. And it just felt more of a sense of ease that I hadn't felt in quite some time. But, it wasn't one and done for me either. And I think everyone's different. And there's another saying that I like, which is like, the deeper the trauma, the more times it needs to be let go. So, but I think these experiences, if you do them all alongside some of these other practices like meditation, I think is quite foundational. Then I think you can kind of sustain this better state of being.
Yeah, for sure.
But those patterns, sometimes they get like really deeply rooted in us. And so, it takes a lot of effort over some period of time to sometimes like correct them,
Oh yeah.
I think I'm still working on them, I've made a lot of progress over 10 years, but it's like, it's
well, we're all works in progress forever.
Yeah. And life doesn't stop coming at you.
No, like there's no fixing. It's, again, this is the corollary I always have to, or correlation to, I always say that like I'm terrible. I always say corollary. It's not the right word. Correlation to, physical fitness. It's like, there's no end point. You just wake up and do it again tomorrow. Right. Like you never win, so to speak. You might win a competition, but it's like, you're not done ever. Right. So it's just, that's the same way with everything in life. What, was that first experience? Was that psilocybin or was it something else?
It was psilocybin.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And then, but then you still went off, right, and did the consulting thing for a while. You went to McKinsey and after that?
Yeah, I mean, so through grad school, I was learning a lot about meditation, and I was going on long form programs, and I was also, experimenting with different plants. And then when I graduated, my brother and I started a business when I was in school, and I was working on that. And I went and did a teacher certification in meditation at Jefferson University. And then I was working on this business with my brother and teaching meditation, and I was doing really well. I was back in my hometown. I had purposeful, meaningful work. I had, good practices. I was taking good care of myself. I basically cut out alcohol, and, I was doing much, much better than I was coming out of the service. And then, now with the benefit of hindsight, looking back, there was a bit of a pivot point. I ended up accepting this job at McKinsey Company, and I went there for a few years. And then I was doing, private equity, which is, was probably even more misaligned work for me. In some ways that's bare knuckle capitalism. And so over the course of 5 years in the corporate world, I ended up in almost as bad a place as I was coming out of the service, and I'm looking around at a lot of my peers who, a lot of them come from families of means and had really good educations. And a lot of them are exhibiting similar symptoms. Now, it's not as intense as a Ranger probably, but like the sleeplessness, the troubled relationships, the alcoholism, the use of prescription drugs. I mean, I was blown away how many people were taking an upper in the morning and a downer in the evening, just as regular course of business.
Right.
And so I just got to almost like another kind of breaking point where I was like, what am I doing? And then I left. And then this was, over 3 years ago now. And I just got back to teaching meditation. And then this whole thing has kind of come out of that reset. And I finally feel like I'm working on something that is in alignment with me.
Weren't you doing like meditation teaching at McKinsey too, or something like that, right?
I was.
Yeah.
I was co-leading the internal mindfulness program, which I loved and was really proud of. But what was ironic and, a bit embarrassing was there was a point in time where I was teaching meditation and I had become so anxious. I had lost my own practice. So I was, kind of full of it at this point. But I had gotten caught up in that work environment and the franticness, even though I knew better and had developed some practices. If you swim in water that is not the right water for you, you got to be really strong for it not to affect you. Most people it's going to affect. I wasn't strong enough to be in that environment and not get pulled out of rhythm.
Yep.
So yeah.
I feel you on that one. Can I ask you, just before we go on to what you're doing now, which is I think going to be the bulk of this, but did you have other physical problems as well? Or was it kind of, I don't want to say pure mental. I don't like doing that, but was it sort of, you had a TBI potentially, it sounds like, and you were having kind of cognitive, mental kind of things, but were there other sort of physical things you felt, pain or dysfunction or anything like that?
Well, after that head injury, my sleep got, I would say maybe I'm still dealing with some sleep challenges from that. Mm-hmm. But for years after that, yeah, for sure. And then, I had, all kinds of pain in my body. It almost was like, where is there not pain? Like a lot of guys, right? Just all of the miles and the dings and the bruises, and then the generalized inflammation that happens in the body when the body's so out of alignment, not resting. And
do you attribute some of that just to the central nervous system stuff as well? Just being on kind of like the fact that your central nervous system gets so ramped up like that, then that sort of exacerbates any pain,
100%, right? Yeah. Like your body, a lot of pain is inflammation in some ways. And, your body can deal with inflammation if it's in kind of good resonance and it's getting into that parasympathetic dominant state and you're sleeping really well. Yep. And it can kind of do all those functions. Like the body's really resilient, can heal a lot of things
totally
on
agree.
its own.
Yep.
If it's in balance. But, if you're not in balance, then you're just like it's like chronically getting worse little by little over time.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. I was talking about the last interview I did with Tim Cruikshank. I was saying the exact same thing. It's like people don't give our bodies the credit they deserve in terms of how well it can heal itself if you clear all the clutter out of the way, right? Like
exactly.
I think the balance that's a great way to say it. And that's kind of what I say as well. That's really eloquent of, it's like, if you can get it in a homeostasis, it'll heal itself.
It'll heal itself.
But for most people, that's not the way they're operating.
No.
Or like they're grossly one way or the other, or whatever they've got going on. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, so talk about what you're doing now, because you've obviously carved out a path that as far as I can tell, you're super passionate about and doing very well at. And we obviously have a personal story that we can talk about as well, of how we got introduced and interacted. But tell everybody what you do now.
Yeah. Well, I do. I love it. I think it's my life's work. I think it's so meaningful, and the time is now, the world is opened up to these different ways of thinking and these different plants. And so I run Beckley Retreats, which is in some ways the continuation of this woman by the name of Amanda Fielding's legacy, who started the Beckley Foundation, which has been one of the world's leading research nonprofits for psychedelics for the last 25 years. And her and her family and others, supporters, a handful of years ago, saw that the world was changing and kind of said, now's the time. We can get it out of the labs and out of the research environment, and now is the time to start building the infrastructure. And so, I had been thinking about, potentially doing these long form programs that I had participated in things that are similar to what I'm doing now and had gotten a lot of benefit. And I got introduced to Amanda and her family, and we were thinking about it the same way. And we were like, okay, well, there's a good partnership to be had here. Let's do it together. And now, we run, holistic well-being programs that use psychedelics as a tool. And we use, I would say like an integrative health approach, and have designed a program that teaches people the basic well-being practices and gives them these mystical experiences or, really profound experiences. And then through that, you can actually get a lot of good habit change, and I think that's where sometimes we see a pretty significant gap is like these experiences on their own can be really beneficial. But like we were talking about earlier, if you don't do anything, if you don't change any habits, put any new routines in place, it's pretty likely you're going to revert back, So then we looked at adult learning. We looked at habit change science. We looked at kind of integrative health best practices. We looked at what was happening with psychedelics in the clinical environment. We looked at what was happening with psychedelics in indigenous communities and said, hey, maybe these people that have been doing this work for thousands of years nonstop have something to tell us, and we should honor that. And we put together kind of a comprehensive approach that includes like a prep, an immersive experience, and then a follow-up.
So you're saying there might be knowledge about indigenous medicines that goes beyond Western medicine, like what we've figured out in the last 250 years. There's other people in the world that actually know something about how these things work.
Yeah, and maybe the fact that there's not like a profit incentive doesn't color what they think.
Yeah.
Right. Doesn't color what they do.
Yes.
I mean, that's the big elephant in the room is just like, the Western medical system is owned. Let's be honest,
Yes.
And there's been really amazing advancements, but boy, you got to take a lot of it with a grain of salt too, and think about where it's coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. So wait, so just go back to, was this something, the Beckley Retreats, was it something where like you had an idea where you were trying to form this and then you went out and sought the kind of backing of the Beckley Foundation? How'd that work? How'd the link up happen there?
So I left that private equity job. I did a full kind of life reset. I ended up in Mexico, just getting away from everything. And I
remember this.
I was teaching meditation again. And then, there's a lot of this type of work in that area where I was. There's also a local indigenous people there called the Huichol that are really accessible and very open. And I got to spend some time with them. And it started really simple. It was kind of meditations on the beach. And sometimes, people could take a little psilocybin and meditate together. And then, friends came down, and then friends of friends. And then I kind of had this moment. I had never really thought about doing it as a job. I was just figuring out what was next and doing something that I loved. And I was like, well, why don't I just do this? Like, I love this. And so then I went and looked I knew, who's going to need some resources, and knew, this type of work. I wanted to find somebody that had some credibility, right? Because I knew that there was a lot of skepticism. And so then I got connected with the Beckley crew, Amanda and her family. But they had been similarly thinking about getting into retreats, and they had been looking for an entrepreneur. And then we got connected, and I had been looking for them basically. And they, in some ways, had been looking.
Right. I was trying to remember how you and I got linked up. And this was back, right? It was like Evolue or what was the name of that?
Evolutio was the
Evolutio
that I was.
Yes.
That I was kind of, figuring out in Mexico. And then, that went away. And how did Retreats.
I don't remember. How did we get linked up? I remember now that you sent me that deck or whatever that was like, hey, here's this concept. But who?
I don't know. Let's look back through the emails. I don't know.
I can't remember how that connection happened.
I don't know. I mean, come on, the veteran.
I know. Well, I just blame it on TBI. I just go, hey, it's it's cognitive dysfunction. I can't remember these things anymore. But
I'm going to look in my emails. I'm curious.
We may need to take a pause here for those that are listening, so we can figure out how we actually got linked up. But it was more like I was going to you were looking for advisors or something, but I just don't remember how the connection happened. Anyway, we can look it up afterwards. We'll figure this out. But Anyway, at some point,
it's been a while.
Yeah, it has. Although even when you say 3 years, to me, it feels like a lot longer that you've been doing this. It just feels like you're like in this and like really rooted in it. And when you said that, I was like, wow, it seems like a lot longer since.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's always been in the background of my life, you know what I mean? In some ways, you know, and I, you know, did kind of, was taking this type of work quite seriously in 2012 to 2015 or so. And then, I lost my way a bit, but yeah.
So I think this is probably a good time to just talk real quickly. So anyway, so you and I got linked up at some point, and then you had this, well, again, I think we were talking about this brand for a little bit, but then it morphed into, hey, I've got this pilot retreat that I'm doing with Beckley out of the country. And do you want to come to this thing? Because it's low cost. It's sort of like friends and family kind of thing, and investors and supporters. And I'd sort of dipped my toe with some ketamine. That's the first psychedelic, even though it's not technically a psychedelic, that I had tried. And I'd had a good experience there by and large, not without its challenges, but overall I thought I gained something from that. And I had looked at other things, right? I mean, there's this whole host of psychedelics out there that people go do on various, there's ayahuasca and ibogaine and 5-MeO and, you know, and I'd looked at that. I'd almost pulled the trigger on that a couple times, but I liked this idea of not jumping in the deep end, which is what a lot of special operations guys do with everything, right? Like anything we do, it's like, we're just the hardest fucking thing we can do. Like, is it the hardest thing? Yes, that's what I'm all about. Just full throttle.
We can drop F-bombs. I feel so much more comfortable now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I don't care at all. I got the little explicit tag on the podcast, so yeah, it's fine. If people don't like it, they can not listen. And so I just think there's so many people, and it's just alpha types in general, or even go-getters, that they look at that as the solution for everything. And it's I'm going to do the same thing. Like if I'm going to go, hey, psychedelics. Yeah. What's the hardest one possible? What's the thing that's just going to blast me in outer space? And I've learned through my chronic illness stuff, it's like, that is not generally a good idea to jerk the wheel. And so again, I'd kind of done ketamine that was like very gentle by and large. And so when I was looking at things and you came across my desk, so to speak, and it was a psilocybin thing, I was like, okay, there's a lot of natural stuff, but it can be a lot softer. It can be, and you also really put me on, I think we had multiple calls where I was all freaked out, and you're like showing me data. The one, actually, I want you are going to quote this better than me, but it was the one about like basically nobody overdoses or dies from psilocybin. And in terms of how dangerous it is, like alcohol is way, way more dangerous than psilocybin, right?
Yeah. If you really like look at the data, there was this is an interesting little, like, I don't know, serendipitous wink or something. But when I was in grad school, I read an article in The Economist that was about this study, and it has that chart that I showed you.
Yes,
that racks and stacks, most of the known drugs, and then it's harm to self, harm to others. So you get this like net harm score. And I mean, you just think about it, alcohol is, how many people do you know whose lives have been fully ruined by alcohol?
Yes. In numerous ways, right?
And drinking and driving and domestic abuse and just, my God. And so there was a study that was actually done in the UK. And I read that study when I was in graduate school. And then I found out 10 years later, and I always remembered that study. That always stuck with me. And that was around the time I was starting to experiment with these plants myself. And then I found out 10 years later that Amanda Fielding was the architect of that study. So okay. How funny is that?
Yeah. And for people that don't know Amanda Fielding, by the way, like she is a goddess in psychedelics,
she's the queen.
Right? Pioneer, on the level of Timothy Leary and whoever else you might want to put up there in terms of like the the real kind of people that were groundbreakers with this stuff. And she's
Yeah,
still around and sort of has.
She's still working
Yep.
10-hour days. She's
Yeah.
a really amazing woman. I mean, it's
Yeah.
such an honor to get
Yeah.
to work with her.
So yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I just love people like her. I mean, she had a belief, you know, she thought that the world could benefit from these plants if they're used in the right way.
Yep.
And she dedicated her entire life to it, going completely against the grain. And most of the world for most of her life thought she was completely nuts.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's only in the last few years where people have been like, okay. And I just have so much respect for her. And for her too, is, you know, I mean, she was she had a fortunate life, which allowed her to make, you know, different decisions than others. So that's, you know, worth noting. But it was never about the money for her. You know what I mean? She was never trying to capitalize off this. She just thought it was good for the world. And I think we need to, I want to celebrate people like that more than
100%.
100 millionaires, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And nothing against, like, I think we all want to be successful in whatever way whatever that means for us. Right. Like, like making money's great. You know, if that gets you what you want in terms of the ultimate goal in life. But yeah, I mean, I think people that are out there doing it where they're really providing something of value to others and making the world better. They're not just making money off the backs of others is really the folks that are admirable. Anyway, so you were able to put me in my comfort zone about this pilot retreat, and I was like, okay, let's do it. And there were a couple other guys. There was one other guy going, John Macaskill. John and Will have been on this podcast talking. We've talked extensively about this retreat, so
Nice.
Don't need to rehash all of what happened to me there.
Oh, what a magical event that was to have you guys down.
Yeah, but I just want to hit the wave tops at least here, because what's important about it and what I want to highlight is the process you guys have, which I think is so important, right? So we spent, I think, 4 weeks ahead of time doing introductory calls and kind of doing some meditation and just like getting to know one another. And this was with other participants and with facilitators. And then we go down, we're out in the middle of nowhere, really beautiful location. And we spent a couple of days, you know, again, amazing. This is where you and I finally met in person.
Yeah.
And then we spend at least 2 days before even we did a journey, getting to know one another, eating with one another, experiencing nature, meditating, doing breath work.
Yeah.
Then we had the first ceremony. We had a day in between where we like went out in nature again and integrated and all of that. And then we did another one and then closed out the retreat, came home. And then there was a whole like 6-week integration process post that we did via Zoom and other things like that. So it's this really holistic thing. It's not just show up, take some drugs and see you later. Right.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of, I actually don't know what the sort of clinical moves are in this, but I feel like there's a lot of move of like, get in a doctor's office. We're going to give you this dose and you're going to have your experience and then we'll send you on your way. Now there probably is more to that. I'm probably completely speaking out of turn, but what I will say is having no basis of comparison personally, where I hadn't done this before, I thought that the lead up and post work was fantastic and essential. I thought I've said this to numerous people. I thought the group setting really made it better. It was in the natural setting. So not being in a white walled office with somebody sitting there with a clipboard. Again, I don't know if that's what actually happens, but being outside basically and being sort of in an indigenous, natural, traditional kind of setting where we did a ceremony and it was very much like we're in touch with the world around us and we're here with other people and we're experiencing their energy as well. And I've said this to you, the facilitators, like, I'm sorry, but I don't know what they would do in a clinician's office, but the facilitators there, man, they earned whatever they're paid, they earned it in spades because this is again, my ignorance going in. I'm like, I don't see what the point is of any of this. but like for 6 hours, they're singing, they're like setting the mood, they're coming over and they're working with you when you need the support. I mean, it was so critical to the whole thing. Yeah, so all of that, man, I think just made a huge difference. It's like the sharing of stories afterwards too, like that, the informal integration piece of it, where we're just sitting around for a day talking about what we experienced with one another, was so critical. So let me stop there and just kind of anything you want to say about that
Well,
first
thank you
one.
so much. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's yeah, it's such an honor to get to witness people coming through the programs and having experiences, particularly veterans, because they're close to my heart, and I agree with you. And that's kind of why we do it this way. And nature matters. A lot of us are chronically disconnected from nature if we're living that city life. And I mean, you can measure, there is energetic exchanges that's happening when you're in nature, and we can measure some of them. And there's probably lots of other things that are happening that we haven't figured out how to measure yet. And so it is important, I think, to get people away from everything, do a bit of a digital detox, give the mind and the being some space. I think you lose something when you have, I'm super supportive of the clinics because it looks like the data is good, and maybe that's more accessible, but maybe you're leaving something on the table if you have an experience like that, and 1 hour later you're back home in the environment. Like, how much space are you giving for these shifts to happen? And so I believe in that approach. And then the group, I mean, for sure, the group, like, I think the group has such a positive benefit on the experience. And I think, again, I've benefited from Western psychotherapy and your standard talk therapy. But in some ways, I think what I've come to learn over the years is, sometimes some of our problems is literally we're in this like loop and we're thinking about all our stuff like way too much.
Yeah, totally.
And we're just like, and then you go to a professional and then they just reinforce this loop. They're like, well, what about this? Da, da, da. And you're just like, and really sometimes those people that are in those loops, they need to just like get out of their own head. And when you're with other people and you hear that your story is actually common, everybody's got their stuff. This is the human condition that we're all working through. There's something in that, and just like being around other peers as opposed to like an expert that is, in some ways teaching you about it's a different way of thinking about
I agree.
these experiences. And I think not that one's right or wrong, but there's some, I think, people and desired outcomes or indications that fit really well with the group experience. And then there's probably some that are better for like one-on-ones, and we're starting to figure out, how to make those matches.
Yeah. I think I just think so much of, you're totally right. So much of the current sort of mental health crisis out there is like an increasing isolation problem.
Yeah.
It's just people, to your point, it's like everyone is just, I am most of the time by themselves. And so, you're just like, you're just with your own thoughts. Whereas if you're around people all the time, it's not that you're ignoring your own thoughts. It's just like that stuff doesn't impact you. It's like you're processing kind of through things naturally the way you would with a group of people. Like that's how we've evolved to operate, just not in these like completely isolated bubbles that we're in now. It's just, I think it's a recipe for disaster.
Look at some of these longevity studies, and it shows over and over again, really like the main driver, if not, at least one of the top main drivers, is like connection with other human beings.
Yeah.
And I think particularly in the United States, because of the way our culture has evolved, we've lost a lot of that, And so to be able to come together with other people that are trying to do the same thing, you can have a more real experience. I think a lot of people say this, you can have a more real experience with a group over the course of a couple weeks, and get to like a deeper level of intimacy than you might have with someone that you worked for 10 years or 15 years in a corporate environment, just because it's so transactional.
Yeah.
And we just need more of the authentic heart,
Yep.
time.
So talk about then the evolution of so from that sort of pilot program, you now have a fully fledged company. You're doing this multiple times a year. I don't even know how many times, multiple locations. So, and then, so kind of go over that, but then like the evolution of the program too, like, has it changed at all? Like, do you do things any differently than you did initially?
Yeah. So yeah, we're in Jamaica in the Netherlands now. We run on average, like, 2 to 3 programs a month. So,
Wow. That's a lot.
yeah, it's a lot. There's a lot of demand,
Yeah.
and yeah, the program has evolved. And actually I'll share with you our updated one. But I'm really happy with where it is. And I think we're going to keep learning, and it can get even more sophisticated. But like I said earlier, if you look at habit change science, and we say we really want to help people develop some new routines, there's some magic to how many times you touch different topics, and how you chunk them so that they're digestible for people,
Yep.
So we've kind of like integrated that. We've also looked at, adult learning. The woman that runs programming for us, Alexandra Palace, who's one of my teammates, she comes from that background. So she kind of knows how to take an adult through a curriculum to get into them. And so there's an understanding that's not just like surface level, there's like there's a science to that. And so we've kind of woven that through. And then from a tech perspective, I mean, we have an app. We can talk about this a bit more. It's an interesting thing to use technology when you're trying to also encourage people not to use technology.
Yes,
but there's like some ways to do it. But so people, that when they come on a program, they get access to our catalog of content, which is probably, 5, 6x what you saw. And it's just, we also know this from adult learning too, is there's some taste factor, right? So people are going to embrace and are more likely to adopt things that they like. And not everyone is going to like every different form of meditation.
Of course.
So you try and give them options and then say, we don't care really which one, just pick. And then people are taking those through the whole process. And it's still 4 weeks prep, 5-night immersive experience with 2 psilocybin sessions, and then 6 weeks of digital follow-up. But I think how seamless it is through, and like the quality of the modules has improved dramatically.
Now, why did the reason you kind of picked psilocybin as your thing, was that just because it was the one you were exposed to and it worked well? Did you try out other things and you were like, don't really like him as much? I'm just kind of curious of the decision process there.
Yeah, I've tried most except Ibogaine. I think I'll do Ibogaine at some point this year. I know we've got lots of buddies that's been profound for, and I think
for sure,
for some indications there's nothing like it. But yeah, we chose psilocybin after a lot of thinking, and psilocybin, it works really well. Mushrooms, we use naturally grown mushrooms that contain
actually
psilocybin.
That's a good point to bring that up, right? Like when we did it, it was in this hollowed out gourd, like half a gourd with
like tea.
With tea.
Yeah,
looked like a bunch of blue cheese and tea, basically, is what it looked like. Yeah. I thought it was kind of good. Like the tea was really good, and it's just kind of chewy stuff, so.
Yeah. And there's places in the program where we lean towards a more traditional way of doing things, and there's places in the program where we lean towards a little bit more clinical, and we try and have a bit of a blend. But I think you can over clinicalize it. So, we've been thoughtful about kind of how we find that balance. But mushrooms, I mean, they've been used for thousands of years. They're actually one of the most well-researched psychedelics. They're incredibly safe. The range of outcomes for individuals, I would say, is way tighter than like with ayahuasca, where the potential range of outcomes is like here. There's just like a lot more kind of chance for really intense stuff that you weren't expecting.
Yeah.
And then, the other thing too is that there's cultural sensitivities around some of the other plants.
True.
And we wanted to not, you know, if we were going to at some point do ayahuasca, that needs to be done, you know, in a much more thoughtful way where there's not as much, there's some cultural sensitivities around mushrooms, you know, we're thoughtful of that, but it's not as much as around some of the other plants. So we said it's safe, it works really well. It's more, you know, it's a more of an entry level one, if you will. And so it just made sense. It just made sense.
Yeah. Can you talk about the research? Because that's something for people that are skeptical or they're opposed to it. What's the research out there that tells you what it can do for people?
Yeah. Well, and I think it is fair to say that the science around the benefits of psychedelics is emerging. So we haven't, you know, we don't have big data sets of double-blind placebo psilocybin.
I don't know how you do a placebo with psilocybin.
This is something that the research community is struggling with. Like, how do you do a placebo psilocybin study? Yeah. You know, so I think, but the data that we do have for treatment-resistant depression, PTSD, end-of-life anxiety, the data is like really clear. But you know, you could say that it's limited, and then so I think that's fair to say. But then I think the other point is you need to look at what's the safety protocol, you know, or what's the risk profile of these compounds. Well, you know, normally when a drug company takes something through clinical trials, it's a compound that's never been known to man before.
Right.
And so, you want to see how that's in the population for a long time before you start giving it widely. Well, we already know that with mushrooms.
That's a great point.
It's like people have been using it for thousands of years. People have been using it recreationally for a long time. So you can kind of back into some of it. And we just know like also that it's non-toxic, right? Where there's a toxicity component to a lot of different drugs. There's like very, very few contraindications with other drugs. So like from a safety risk profile, which is kind of what that study was trying to look at, was like, just look at risk. It's way lower than, you know, a lot of drugs that we take all the time. So then if the risk is relatively low, which I think you can actually like demonstrate with good data, and then the potential upside is in some cases like radically positive, then why not give it a shot?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Now where these compounds, plants, tools, medicines can get where there can be more risk is if they're not done in the right environment.
Right.
You know, and if you take a bunch of mushrooms and you don't know what you're doing and you end up in a challenging situation and your entire world shifts, that can be a traumatic experience because it can scare the hell out of you.
Yes.
But you can, you know, pretty much eliminate the traumatic potential if you just like do good prep, you have really good facilitators, you do it in a safe setting. You know, it's not going to be traumatic. It might be challenging. You had to go.
Yeah.
But not to the point where you're going to regret doing it or have some like lingering negative effects, you know?
Yeah. I hope I wasn't
it's a risk calculation, you know?
Yeah. I hope I wasn't your most challenging case ever.
No, veterans, you know, a lot of times have some big things to let go of.
Yeah, for sure. So talk about that because don't you have veteran specific retreats at this point?
Yeah, we do. We do them with Heroic Hearts and Jesse Gould and Imperial College London. So we've done a few of them, and we're hoping to do more. And those are interesting because we're actually looking at TBI specifically. Mm-hmm. I mean, we'll see. We're tracking the data over time, but I can tell you from being there on site, it can dramatically change someone's life, you know. And then the question is, how do you maintain that? You know, how do you not let it revert back?
Yes.
And just get back in your old ways, and you can see the world completely differently and be thankful for everything, and still be an alcoholic, and that alcohol can catch back up with you. You know, so it's got to be a kind of a more comprehensive approach to these things, you know. And they're not one and done.
Are there practices that you like specifically? I mean, some of it's kind of obvious, I guess, but meditative practices, whatever it may be, that you think are the most beneficial post, post a retreat that for people?
I think meditation's in a kind of in a bucket of its own.
Yeah.
It's that important. It's that foundational.
Yeah.
So you got to, I think we really try and encourage people to just make that part of their daily ritual, and a little is good, more is better. And then time in nature, I think, is really important too. Good fitness, exercise, stressing the body in the right way, nutrition.
Yep. Basics.
Basics.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if most people did those things, and had some good community.
Yep. Speaking my language, man.
Get off most of the drugs.
Yeah. No, 100%. And man, I just recently, especially for me, I found the community aspect, the isolation piece is such an enormous component of it.
It really is.
So you also have a scholarship program, right? Where people who can't financially kind of afford what you do. So how does that work?
Well, we're a public benefit corporation. So That's something I'm really proud of. We're trying to find this middle path between a for-profit entity and a nonprofit, because I actually believe the world needs more middle path companies. There's some good things that come from capitalism in the way it allocates resources, but like big capitalism without any controls is a disaster and is ruining the earth, So it's like, and I think it's right in alignment with this work too. This work is about the middle path. So it's like we're trying to be a middle path company. So we have a dual mandate, if you will, which is to be sustainable and to increase accessibility. So we have a scholarship program that we fund and that we also take donations for. And then on a quarterly basis, people can apply, and it's needs based. And, we have a couple different filters that we use to award those.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. Can we talk a little bit just about because I was reading this on your site and I hadn't ever looked at this, but how psilocybin works. And the thing that I was reading, which I thought was interesting, was basically it was saying that it, like an SSRI works or attaches whatever to the serotonin 1A receptor in your brain. Although I'm a little bit like, yeah, but didn't they just prove that SSRIs don't do anything with serotonin, and that serotonin doesn't even do anything? Or isn't the right, I don't know about this, but then it was saying psilocybin attaches to the 2A receptor, which is somehow different. Can you dig into that a little bit?
Well, that's right. You're recounting it right.
Yeah.
And, that's my understanding. I think they're still very much trying to figure out the mechanics.
Yeah.
But for me, it's interesting, but to me, it's kind of like with the fMRI brain scans.
Yeah.
It's like, it's really cool to see that this part of the brain lights up now that didn't light up after a psilocybin experience. That's great. But I really don't care if there's no symptom change. So I'm like, let the folks that are doing that figure that out, and if they can draw the straight line, sometimes I think we're kidding ourselves to be able to actually say, definitively it is this that does this, that, because the body's so wildly complex, you know what I mean? And so, and, like you said, with SSRIs, like we told ourselves that there was this one mechanism of action for the last, few decades. And now, we don't really think that's the case anymore.
Yeah.
So,
the only reason I asked that was like, if there's some, I agree with you. It's at some level, it's just like, well, does it work? Is it safe? Did it make your life better? Great, great, right? I think it can be really interesting when we understand how these things work, because if that can then like help us make it more effective for people, right? Or tweak it or whatever, I think I take your point about, I would prefer a natural experience as well. But if there's a way to synthesize it, that it could, let's say you could synthesize it in a way that you could make it, like you could take away all the downsides of it or something like that, right? Like where you could just improve it somehow, then that's worth digging into. It's not for me to do, certainly. It's probably not for you to do either. Some big head, with a lab coat on can figure that out. But I do find that stuff kind of interesting, right? Like if you can dig into that stuff. But
there's definitely people out there that are that are working on that. And there's some interesting companies that are trying to, give people psychedelics that don't have a psychedelic experience.
Yeah, which is weird.
It is, but I mean, let's see if it provides symptom reduction, and like you said, maybe it's more accessible for people, less scary. That's great. But again, regardless of the mechanism of action, the real test is going to be, does this thing work? And that's what we track. Is the pre and the post and the follow ups to say, are we meaningfully improving people's lives?
Yeah. So what's the future for Beckley then? Is it like, is there growth beyond this that you're looking to make? Is it go to more countries to have more retreats to replicate the process in more places? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think, more centers and more locations. We really want to work towards a more regenerative business model. And I think that in order to do that, you need to get the centers closer to the people. So I envision a world where there's retreat centers outside major metropolitan areas. They mostly serve that local population. They're mostly staffed by that local population. All the economics mostly stay in that cycle. And then when people are done their long form program, they go back into their normal living environment. But there's enough people from the that are doing that work together that they can do the community thing, and they can go meditate together, go get in nature together. I think that's more of an optimal end state than what we're doing now, which is flying people in and flying people out. And but we also, no one in this company has some big. We're not looking to like dominate the psychedelic industry. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're like trying to go where we flow, kind of grow like mushrooms grow, and where we think we can add value, but we're not going to, go heavy handed into places. It's like, okay, if there's a geography where there's a need and we think we can, build something in right relationship with the communities that are there, we'll go. But that'll depend a lot on how laws change.
And with that, or to that point, are you involved at all in the legislation in the U.S. that's trying to legalize some of this stuff?
I mean, we don't have a lobby arm of Beckley Retreats, but I'm involved in a lot of those discussions. I would imagine you might be too, just because veterans just seem to have taken up the torch and are
big time.
It's encouraging to me. But when you have, AOC on one side and Dan Crenshaw on the other side, shaking hands around psychedelics for veterans, veterans are breaching the dam. So I'm really excited about that, and participate in those efforts where I can. And we're staying close to what's happening in Oregon and Colorado, and we'll be in the United States at some point, but it'll be a little while.
Yeah. Do you worry at all about, one thing that I think is a potential downside to this sort of psychedelic revolution that's happening right now? And I even went to, what was it called? There was like a psychedelic convention in Denver.
MAPS. You were at the MAPS?
MAPS. I was at the
MAPS.
MAPS.
You hang out there?
Yeah. Oh, no, I don't know if we saw each other there. I was just there for like a day or like half a day.
Okay.
I kind of swung in on my way through. But I mean, massive convention center with you name it, right?
12,000 people.
Yeah, like booths all over the place doing. I mean, they even had a thing I sat in that was like, it basically mimicked a psychedelic vision or journey without anything. It was just like lights outside, and it kind of worked. It was like not really the mind expanding part, but like the visual part was pretty wild. It was like, wow, this is crazy, man. So yeah, that was interesting to see. But I guess where I'm going with that is, do you worry at all about it overreaching? Because my concern is people get too cavalier about it. It gets to be too like, hey, yeah, just go eat a bunch of mushrooms, whatever it may be. And we're right back where we used to be, where it's like, it's outlawed, like this is too dangerous, whatever. And people are genuinely unsafe about it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. I think I do worry about a blowback. I don't know if it'll get like shut down again, like it did, with the drug wars, because I think we've kind of like crossed over there.
Yeah, you're probably
but but I think that there's risk here, and more is not always better.
Right.
I mean, there's, if you do, and I mean, I see this in the veteran community too. You can use these experiences to tune out. You can just start chasing highs. So you can use these, you can use these plants irresponsibly, and then I don't think they're good, and they can actually, if not used in the right way, and I think in conjunction with like meditation and basically taking better care of yourself and some, like you said, the basics, they can exacerbate problems, so there's going to be a lot of that. And it's the wild, wild west right now in some sense with, people that are, selling mushrooms or running programs, no experience, it's like the gold rush, and there's some people out there that are just trying to make a quick buck.
Yes.
And there's going to be some consequences to that.
Yeah.
But there is something special here, that has incredible potential.
Yep.
But it's like, you're kind of playing with fire in some ways too. So it's like when something's really powerful, it needs to be done with reverence and some humility and thoughtfulness. We can't be so reckless with it, but we're humans and we can't help ourselves sometimes,
Yeah, totally. But I think it's my feeling with any substance you put in your body, with the exception of probably just food, right, and water, is if it's a quote unquote drug, and that can be anything from psilocybin to caffeine, is that really you should look to those things when you have a problem that you are really struggling to figure out a solution for on your own. But hopefully do it in a way that's minimum effective dose and it's a temporary thing, right? Like we really shouldn't, and this is my problem with the pharmaceutical industry too, is just like no solution in my estimation should be take this drug for the rest of your life, whatever that may be, unless again, that's absolutely necessary for some reason.
Yeah.
But
I agree.
By and large, it should be like, okay, you've got this issue, working through it as much as you can with your own, like dialing your health and nutrition and all that stuff. And it's like, you might still need whatever it may be. And that can be any number of things, but it still should be like, okay, what's the least of this thing? Or maybe the less frequent, like, once or whatever, that kind of opens my eyes, shifts my thing, whatever, shifts the chemistry of my body or something, right? To sort of like help me get on this new path. And then but it's not to be dependent on it.
Yeah.
Then you're just an addict, right? Like you can be addicted to anything, and
for sure.
Right. And that can be true. I think that can be true with psychedelics too. There can be people that are just addicted to the experience.
Definitely.
Right.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like there's as much like physical dependency like you might see with like heroin or something.
Sure.
But for sure you can even use meditation to tune out, I've met people along the years that, meditate for 5 hours a day, but in my estimation, it's really because they're avoiding things in their life and they've started to walk this path, not to turn into life and deal with what's there, but to get away from it, and so that's not going to help you in the long term.
Yep.
Psilocybin, same thing. You can take it and just like, it'll kind of get you away from your problems if you use it in the wrong way for a period of time. And then, that's not good. But if you use it in the right way, kind of with the right approach, you can, be more present, more well.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Well, is there anything we didn't cover there about you, about Beckley? Anything else you want to go over?
No, I mean, we got through a lot, man.
Yeah.
It's really cool. It was really fun to think back this few years ago on that program with you, me, John, and Will.
Yeah.
I got to reach out to those guys.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, they're doing well. John's still, I think they're both still doing well from everything I see. I actually talked to John a couple of weeks ago. And so he's so busy with his like public speaking.
He's a star.
Yeah. That he can't.
Trying to get on his calendar
cover
now.
all of his business now, which is good. That's great for him. So yeah, man. I mean, it's one of these things where, I know I've referred a couple people down to your program that have had good results, and so happy to keep doing that. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I really
it's one of these things
appreciate it.
where I got to take my own advice, and I don't feel the pull to do that at all at this point in my life with really anything. And I've had people even say like, hey, you should go do this. And I'm like, yeah, I just don't feel like that's the right thing for me right now. And I try to lean a little more into my intuition than I used to.
Yes.
But who knows, there might be a time. And I mean, certainly the thought of coming and hanging out in Jamaica with you for a couple of days.
Whenever it feels right, man, I'd love to hang out down there. So just let me know. We'll make it work,
Yeah.
And I just heard a quote the other day that I thought was good. It's like psychedelics are not for people that don't want them. Like there needs to be some buy-in.
Yes.
You know what I mean? They are different than some of these other compounds, And so I think that it's right to we do have this intuition that is, that's worth listening to,
Yeah.
And that's what it's about.
Yeah. Cool. Well, say hi to everybody there that I think is still there. Right. Lucine is still there working with you guys. And what's her name? Sophie? Is it Sophie? No.
Sonia.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Say hi to all those folks.
I will, man.
And I hope to see him at some point again. But thanks, man. Appreciate it. You look great.
Yeah, cool.
And
you do too, man.
I'm jealous of your sunshine. Like it's
come down.
Yeah, I should. I need to because it's dark and cloudy outside.
Come get some sun.
Yeah,
you're looking a little pale.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Neil. Take care, man.
Of course, man. Thank you.
Yeah.